Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I wanted to respond to a comment that I got on the last video about slavery, Islam, and the West, and about how the West actually had just deregulated slavery. So someone commented, and I was waiting for this. I knew this was going to come, talking about sex slavery, talking about concubinage, with obviously the implication that it's an immoral thing in Islam, and it shows the moral inferiority of Islam and the Islamic system. So I wanted to respond to that. So this man says, or asks, in Islam, can women be purchased in the markets, in the slave markets, for the purpose of serving as concubines? And the purchaser has the intention of taking her to his home, sleeping with her, treating her, as he has in quotes, humanely, meaning sarcastically, and then he has the intention to take her back in the market after, say, 15 months and selling her again. See, this is the type of comment that is absolutely perfect for illustrating the extent to which Westerners actually think that their concealment of reality, that their hypocrisy, that's supposed to actually be somehow convincing to the rest of the world. The fact of the matter is that they can actually be in the gutter and claim the moral high ground. And they think that we're supposed to just believe them. And the tragic thing, because without this, it wouldn't be tragic, it would just be evil. But the tragic part about this is that there are actually many of them, many people in the West, who have such a devastating degree of cognitive dissonance that they themselves genuinely believe that the gutter is the moral high ground. That's how propagandized they are. That's how indoctrinated they are. The West created virtual reality goggles for their society long before they ever had the technology to do it. They just did it with propaganda. For anyone in the West to take a holier-than-thou position or attitude or tone with regards to the legality of concubinage in Islam is like someone who's covered head to toe in filth, expressing disgust at someone who doesn't use hand sanitizer. I'm telling you, you can only think that we are ugly because you've never looked in the mirror. So look at yourself, look at your societies. You have legal prostitution across Europe. So you think that what? 15 months of concubinage is immoral, but 15 minutes of sex for money is moral. Well, I mean, you legalized it, so you must think it's fine. 15 months as a concubine, or a year, or 3 years, or a lifetime as a concubine, with one man, with legislated rights and protections, with legislated privileges, versus 5, 10, 15, 20 different men a day with no rights, no protections, no privilege, just the right to be used and abused by random customers. And you think somehow that you are more moral, or that you have the moral high ground, and you think somehow that you're morally superior? You have more than 3 million prostitutes in the West. That's like the entire population of Chicago or Berlin. All of these women are basically deregulated concubines, rented instead of purchased. And you think somehow that that's better, that that's more moral, that that's more enlightened, that that's more advanced. Or you think it's okay because you'd like to tell yourself that they have autonomy, that they have independence, that they are choosing this way of life. Well, then clearly you've never actually asked them. But why would you? The number one reason why women in the West get into prostitution is poverty. They are coerced by their economic circumstances that are imposed upon them by your society and your system. Either that, or they're victims of abuse, or they're forced, or they have been trafficked and literally turned into sex slaves because they were abducted. And the United States is the number one destination for sex trafficking in the world for women and children. And after them, it's Europe. And 90% of these women, 90% of the women who do so-called sex work in the United States and across the West, 90% of them say that they don't want to do it. 90% of them say that they want out, but they don't have a way out. So they say they don't have a choice. And obviously a high percentage of them are either under the control of pimps or a criminal syndicate. So it's no joke when they say they don't have a choice. They are being forced. In Islam, there's basically only 2 ways that a woman can become a concubine. Either she's already a slave and sold as a concubine for someone, or she's a prisoner of war. And now, I know you're going to want to say that that's an inhumane thing to do to prisoners of war, and oh, these poor prisoners of war, you should have more mercy. But you're not in a position to even talk about that. NATO and the United Nations so-called peacekeepers are infamous everywhere they go for raping and abusing girls, for exchanging relief, medical relief, food relief, aid, all kinds of aid in exchange for sex. And they're notorious for creating sex trafficking networks. I think you have something like 2,000 cases right now. The last time I checked, 2,000 cases of sex trafficking by the United Nations in the DRC, in Chad, in the Central African Republic, in Kosovo, in Bosnia, and you're doing it right now with Ukrainian women. No prosecutions. And you're not taking those women into your homes. You're not providing for them. You're not taking care of them. You're not giving them rights and protections and dignity and respect. You're putting them on street corners. You're putting them in brothels. And you're making billions of dollars out of them. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry in the West. And like I said, 90% of the women that you're making that money off of don't want to be doing it. They're forced. So don't tell me about buying a concubine at some hypothetical slave market in the Muslim world in the 1500s when you are renting girls out against their will for 20 minutes at a time, 700 to 1,000 times per year. And she's about 6 times more likely to die than any other woman. You've got slave markets in Hamburg. You've got notorious slave markets in Paris. You've got notorious slave markets in Amsterdam. And you've got notorious slave markets in Lisbon and across every major city in the United States from Tampa Bay to Los Angeles. And one of the cities with the highest number of cases of sex trafficking in the world is Washington, D.C. Just like I said with slavery, you didn't abolish it, you deregulated it. And you did the same thing with concubinage. You deregulated it to take away the rights and protections that these women should have, the women who are in the most deprived and vulnerable situations and circumstances, so that you could maximize profit. A concubine in Islam is not a source of profit for her owner, for her master. She's an expense. You have to take care of her. You have to provide for her. She has security and respect. Why, we had rulers in the Muslim lands. We had rulers in the Muslim empire who were the sons of concubines, and there was no stigma about it. But the deregulated concubines that you have in the West, the short-term rental concubines that you have in the West for maximizing profit, why, they're the lowest of the low in your society. They don't even count in your society. Those women are the people that serial killers practice on because they know that no one cares when they suffer and die. The police aren't going to check. The police aren't going to investigate. Nobody cares. Every one of those women is a faceless, nameless Jane Doe when she turns up in the morgue. Hundreds, if not thousands of men in the city have used her, but when she dies, nobody knows her. Honestly, it never ceases to amaze me. No people. I don't think there's ever been any people in the history of the world as self-deluded as the people of the West. And you're going to come into a Muslim account, a Muslim page with mostly Muslim followers and start spouting Western supremacist talking points. You better save that for some white nationalist subreddit, because you can't come onto a Muslim page, you can't come onto a Muslim account with mostly Muslim followers and start lying about Islam and start lying about the West, because we know both of those subjects better than you. Yes, we know the West better than you. This reminds me of what James Baldwin used to talk about how black people in the United States, particularly in the South, know and understand white people intimately well. But white people don't know anything about black people, because the black people back in the day were the domestic servants of white people. So they would see them in their most intimate moments. They would see every side of their personality. They would see everything about them, and they knew and understood everything about them, but they themselves were never seen by the white people. So the white people never understood the black people, but blacks in America understood white people perfectly well, intimately well, but they could never show even their real face to white people, not that they were ever looked at anyway as people. And it's the same with the West and the global South. We've seen what you do. We've seen you in our countries. We've seen the way you behave. We've seen what your United Nations and your NATO troops do. We've seen what your NGOs do. We've seen what your relief so-called agencies do. We've seen what all of your programs and your National Endowment for Democracy and your USAID and all of your various organizations that find their way into our countries to try to corrupt our people. And we've seen the crimes that you commit. We know you perfectly well. So you can't lie to us about you. And you certainly can't lie to us about our religion, because we know it better than you. So the man who made this comment, I've already blocked him, because he made many comments on many other videos where he was just spouting Western supremacist, anti-Islamic nonsense. So I would suggest that anyone else who has the intention of leaving those kinds of comments, save yourself the time, because I don't get anything but pleasure in deleting a comment that you spent minutes of your life on, and maybe even more minutes trying to Google information that you could put in your comment to try to defame and slander Islam and tell lies about my religion and my history. I don't get anything but pleasure in deleting that comment and emphasizing how much you just wasted your time the same way that you're wasting your life. And of course, I'll block anyone who does that. So I suggest anyone else who has the intention of doing that on my page, on any of my social media accounts, save yourself the time. Because you can't tell us anything about the West that we don't already know, and that we don't already know better than you. And you can't tell us anything about Islam that we don't know better than you. Because we didn't learn about Islam from people who hate Islam. We learned about Islam from people who know what it is. And we didn't learn about the West from people who hate the West. We learned about Islam from the West yourselves. And the lessons that you taught us, we'll never forget. And it's about time you started to see yourselves the way that the rest of the world sees you. It's about time that you actually held up a mirror to your face to realize what you actually look like and what we've all been looking at for all these years. Jazakumullahu khairan. Wassalamu alaikum.